Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at the newest hero released, Setsuka, and with this, she is one of the characters that we've been waiting, as most of the artifacts or old characters that it feels like we've been promised will be released as characters or have wanted to be released as characters are finally actually coming to life. With that, let's actually break down everything about Setsuka, and so without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing you'll notice about Setsuka is that, well, her design is absolutely crazy. Let me just show you exactly what I mean.
Desires. Don't reject it. I'm simply hastening your future.
Yep, you're right to assume that this is maybe even crazier than the old Moonlight Dreamblade art of old, but of course her eating the bell or licking the bell aside, she does look really nice even in game, as you're seeing right now, and I'm a big fan, honestly, of her design, as we'll get into in a moment. Now, if that wasn't enough, her splash art also looks absolutely ridiculous, and that sword is doing wonders right now. However, as we continue to move on to the character and actually her stats, you'll see that she is 113 base speed, has 23 crit rate, and has a decent amount of attack, but notably an also pretty high amount of HP. Now, the reason for this is pretty simple, as aside from stats, you'll actually notice that with her first ability, sorry for the flashbang, you'll see from her skill 2, which you're seeing right now, which is that she increases the evasion of all allies by 30%, and you're right to assume that this is going to be another character who fixates on or focuses on evasion. Now, in addition to this, when an ally except for the caster evades, you counterattack, and of course you're already thinking of probably including characters like Flan with this character, and you would not be wrong to do so. However, more interestingly, after basically attacking, if she has fighting spirit or if her fighting spirit is full, she consumes all and then grants Demon Blade Unleashed to the caster before activating Blade Art Bewitching Blossom. Now, the TLDR of all this, as this is a lot of conditions, essentially once she counterattacks enough times, she consumes all of her health to attack all enemies, and she not only takes takes her turn and gets pushed up, she also deals an insane amount of damage based on the amount of health lost relative for herself. Now, in addition to this, the Demon Blade Unleashed unique effect also reads that it increases her attack by 200%, and she cannot die for a certain number of turns, but cannot be subject to damage sharing effects. So in other words, you aren't able to kind of pocket her in this sense, and effectively she is just going to have to obviously just survive or somehow get back to full life, which we'll see in a moment. Now, the way that they've described this in game, or the way that you'll see this in game, is that again, as she activates this ability, and as you're seeing right now, she just lost all of her health. However, despite this, as you'll see number wise, this is a pretty significant hit to the enemy team. Now, it is also worth mentioning that though this is pretty impactful, a few things you should note from this specific screenshot. There's a defense break here, it's probably on Aureus as well, and in addition to this, an 11,000 HP Ruel is also taking a pretty significant amount of damage. Now, on top of all of this, there is of course also an Empyrean Ilanov. What build she's on, we don't know exactly for sure, but of course, adding some sort of defense or adding some sort of bulkiness is nice, but I also think that's kind of the purpose of Setsuka. Now, to add to this, I don't believe we'll be able to... Oh, actually, you can see it for just half of a second. But the Setsuka is actually being built with a ridiculous amount of health. You can't really see it under my bar, but this is a I believe it's 25,130 HP Setsuka. So similar to a character like Abyssal Euphine, where although you may be able to use or build a lot of attack, or you may find yourself building more damage-oriented stats, she is a character that actually wants to fixate more on HP or a different stat, and then once hitting this immortal or like this new fighting spirit sort of threshold, she can then swap or convert her stats into another and end up doing an insane amount of damage. Now we have to talk about not the skill 2, but actually the skill 3. The skill 3 is also part of the reason why you'll want to invest in the HP of this target, or rather of this character, and that's because you will dispel all buffs with her skill 3 at base, while also inflicting Beguile and then inflicting Blind for 2 turns. Now, again, as you're about to read here, having HP or higher HP is important, as you will actually be able to ignore the effect resistance of targets with less max HP than, of course, Setsuka. Now, to add to the kind of synergy or the gameplay loop of Setsuka, this obviously makes the most sense, because if you're able to add Beguile, or if you're able to apply Beguile while also blinding the enemy on top of having the previously mentioned 30% evasion, even if you aren't a character like Flan who has a... even if you aren't Flan who already has 100% built-in evasion, being able to essentially give something like 80% evasion if you just have enough health, and if Setsuka is able to take the turn, is pretty significant for basically any evasion aligning character. Now, to add to this, if you guys didn't see from the dev notes, we will be also introduced to a new set that allows us to counter or kind of play off of the evasion sets or the evasion meta or the evasion playstyle a bit more. So obviously Setsuka is the perfect addition to that playstyle, and I'm personally pretty excited for just this part of the kit alone. Now, to add to this, we also have her skill 1, and in case you're curious, it does do a decent amount of damage, but more importantly, it also allows you to absorb some of the health dealt as health. And in addition to this, the soul burn for Setsuka is that you can deal increased damage with this. Now, admittedly, this damage is not absolutely crazy. With, if I'm not mistaken, souls, this ended up being something like a 13,000 hit to the Ruel, which is okay, respectable, but you do have to consider that this is, of course, after being given the 200% effect, and of course, it is also a Ruel. So, with all these different factors, we finally come to the most important, I guess, aspect of her kit, actually, which is the artifact that'll be releasing alongside her. And although you may be curious about whether something like Moonlight Dreamblade is her best in slot, it likely isn't, and at least from what I understand, though you may be a bit more enticed or may find Lethal Whispers, her signature artifact, to be a bit more interesting or be one of the options that you choose, I actually think that based on what we've seen from the gameplay, you may not even necessarily want to play off of this counterattack and 40% chance to apply basics, and you may actually end up using something like a Shepherd of the Hollow or Shepherd of Chaos, actually, to kind of give yourself a bit more tankiness. Now, in addition to this, if you are, and I guess in the interim, going to be using something like Double-Edged Crescent, you could obviously use that as well if you want an increased chance to counter. However, as you're probably guessing, this might seem a bit too excessive, as again, you are likely going to be able to counter tons of times if anyone on your team ends up getting hit. Now, based on what we've read from the S2 as well, I do also want to point out that although it says that you are able to counterattack if an ally evades, do note the specific wording where it says when an ally except for the caster evades that you can counterattack. Now, obviously this is pretty interesting, and it does leave some leeway in terms of countering, but it also means that you may need to introduce or add some tankiness to her, introduce a sort of stealth or a hiding mechanic, like something like Guiding Light, or sorry, rather not Guiding Light, but the Leica artifact that allows you to, the Lua artifact, Spatial Temporal Fan, which would allow you to go into stealth or something of this nature so that you can survive for longer. To add to this, if you are someone that ends up using something either like Counter Set or the new Evasion set in order to counter more with Setsuka, as this will likely be a character that tries to get burst down or one shot, these will also be additionally, at least from my understanding, pretty decent sets on her. But of course, as for what we're seeing right now, I think she is absolutely ridiculous. I think she is probably going to be a standout or maybe even aggressive aggro cleave option at the moment. Now, obviously, I think many players have seen that certain characters may be intended to use for team 2 or for slower team compositions, but even if Setsuka is someone that ends up getting used in slower team compositions, I have a feeling that Setsuka is going to be used with these faster tempo teams as somewhat of an anchor, the same way that some people will use someone like Fallen Cecilia, or they'll use the Holiday Yufine, Arunka, or again, pretty much any anti-cleave option as a cleave option instead. I'm excited though to see how she does in the future. She looks pretty cool. Again, we'll have to see her numbers before we actually comment about how crazy or how insane a lot of her damage and things of this nature are, but I don't even think, and although they obviously showcased Fat Cat and the Pera in this team composition, I don't even think you need to go that far, as again, if you are just able to apply the Beguile and the Skill 3 alongside the built-in evasion from 30% chance, these two alone, an 80% chance to effectively miss or basically dodge enemy attacks, is pretty ridiculous, and honestly probably something that is going to be way more annoying, especially if you end up using other characters that have evasion in their kit. That's going to be it for today's video though, guys. I'm really fascinated or excited for Setsuka, and I'm curious or interested in seeing what people will cook up. Thanks again for watching though. I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.